In the heart of the savannah, where the sun rose each morning like a blazing drumbeat and set in a blaze of red and gold, there lay a kingdom known across the lands as Nshira. Nshira was a place where every breath seemed steeped in pride, the pride of its people, their traditions, and the deep roots of their culture. From the tallest elder to the youngest child, each carried the weight of their heritage like a precious jewel, guarding it fiercely and displaying it openly. It was a land of music and color, where markets swelled with laughter and the smell of roasted maize, where warriors marched in bright cloths, and where the women's beauty was spoken of as though it were the very gift of the gods. But in Nshira, beauty was not just an ornament, it was a language, a sign of status, a silent declaration of who you were and where you stood in the order of life. And of all the marks of beauty, none held more power than hair. Hair in Nshira was more than strands that grew from the head, it was history woven into form, stories braided in patterns passed down through generations. The women wore their hair like crowns long before they ever saw the real one, each braid tight and shining, each bead clicking softly like whispered blessings from the ancestors. It was said that a woman's hair could tell the story of her family, her struggles, her victories, and even her worth in the eyes of the gods. The people believed that beauty and nobility lived in harmony, and so it was decreed that the sacred crown, a relic of gold, cowrie shells, and rare river stones, could only rest upon the head of the most beautiful and noble woman during the harvest ceremony. This ceremony was no small event. It was the heartbeat of Nshira's year, a day when every path in the kingdom led to the great square, where drums thundered and dancers stamped their feet into the dust, sending prayers up to the sky. On that day the fields, heavy with grain and cassava, were offered in gratitude to the gods, and the woman chosen to wear the crown was seen as a living blessing, a sign that the kingdom had the gods' favor. The crown itself was said to hold power beyond mortal understanding. Legends whispered that it was forged in the time when God still walked among men, when the river goddess Esi fell in love with a mortal king. She gifted the crown to his bride, binding the kingdom's fortune to the one who wore it. But the gods, jealous and watchful, set a condition: only the purest in heart and the most radiant in beauty could bear it without bringing ruin upon the land. Thus, beauty in Nshira became more than vanity, it became a sacred responsibility. In every home, mothers would wake their daughters before the sun, sitting them between their knees and weaving their hair with care. They told them stories of past crown-bearers, of queens who brought rain in drought and peace in times of war. Young girls grew up dreaming of the moment the elders' hands might rest that crown upon their head, the beads in their braids clicking like the applause of the ancestors. It was a dream that carried both glory and weight, for to be chosen meant not only admiration but also expectation, the eyes of the entire kingdom watching, judging, and measuring your worth. The village's pride in this tradition was matched only by its strictness. Those with thin, unkempt, or unbraided hair were pitted or mocked, whispered about as though they had been denied the gods' favor. A woman's beauty was seen as her honor, and to neglect her hair was almost an act of defiance against the kingdom itself. This belief bound everyone together in silent agreement. The crown was sacred, and not every head was worthy. And so, year after year, as the season of harvest approached, the kingdom shimmered with preparation. Women sat in circles in the courtyards, braiding each other's hair into intricate designs that looked like woven rivers and coiled snakes. The men oiled their beards and sharpened their ceremonial spears, and children practiced dances under the baobab trees until their ankles ached. The air itself seemed to hum with expectation, as though the land was holding its breath, waiting to see whose beauty would shine brightest when the drums called the people together. In Nshira the crown was more than gold and shells, it was destiny. And every girl, whether rich or poor, dreamed of the day the elders might call her name. For to be chosen was not just to be crowned queen for a day, but to be remembered for a lifetime, your name spoken in the same breath as the kingdom's greatest legends. But in a place where beauty was worshipped and hair was the altar, even the smallest flaw could draw sharp tongues and cruel laughter. Pride could be as heavy as the crown itself, and sometimes it could cut as deep as a blade. The harvest ceremony was meant to unite the kingdom, yet it also quietly divided it, separating the admired from the forgotten. And in the shadows of the great square, not every story that began with beauty ended with glory. For in the year our story begins, the crown would be placed upon a head, but not without a storm that would shake the very heart of Nshira. Abony was known throughout the land, though she had never stepped foot inside the palace gates. She lived on the edge of the kingdom in a small mud-walled hut with a thatched roof, left behind by her late parents. Her life was simple. She fetched water from the stream each morning, worked in the fields during the day and wove mats for trade in the evening. But despite her humble existence, there was something about her that made people pause when they saw her. Her hair. It was not merely long, it was thick and heavy like a cascade of midnight silk, each strand catching the sun as though it had been spun with threads of gold. Whenever she walked to the market, mothers would tug at their daughters' hands and whisper, "Look at her hair, even the river spirits must envy it." Some swore that when she passed under the acacia trees, the wind changed direction just to run its fingers through her braids. Abony herself never thought much of it. To her, her hair was simply a part of who she was, something her late mother had cared for with oils from the shea tree and combed with wooden teeth carved by her father. She wore it in long, intricate braids, sometimes adorned with cowrie shells, sometimes left to flow freely down her back. She had no mirrors, but the reflections in the water told her enough. She was not plain. Still, she carried herself with quiet humility, bowing her head in greetings, never walking as though the world owed her notice. But in the palace, far from her modest life, her name began to stir whispers. The chief's daughter Omalara had always been regarded as the most beautiful maiden in the kingdom, her hair long and straight, her skin flawless, her clothes embroidered with gold thread. She had been raised knowing that one day she would wear the sacred crown during the harvest ceremony, a crown that only the most beautiful and noble woman could bear. Yet lately she had noticed the change in people's eyes. When she walked through the village, the admiration that once belonged entirely to her now seemed to falter. Some even dared compare her to the orphan girl from the edge of the kingdom. One afternoon, as Omalara's maid combed her hair in the palace courtyard, two market women passed by and spoke in hushed voices, though not hushed enough. "They say Abony's hair gleams even in the moonlight," one said. "They say if she wore the sacred crown, it would look as if it had always been made for her," the other replied. Omalara's hands clenched and the comb snagged in her hair. That night she could not sleep. She imagined the harvest ceremony, the drums, the dancers, the chief presenting the crown, and instead of her own face she saw Abony's. The image stung her like a thorn in the flesh. Meanwhile, Abony went about her days unaware of the envy she had awakened. She helped old women carry baskets, shared her bread with hungry children, and sang softly to herself while braiding reeds. She never dreamed of crowns or ceremonies. But fate, as it often does, had already placed her in the center of a story she did not choose. The whispers grew until they reached the ears of the chief himself. He laughed when he first heard them, dismissing the idea that an orphan girl could rival his daughter. But jealousy, once planted, does not stay small. It grows roots in the hearts of those who fear losing what they believe is theirs. In the palace it began to take hold. Plans began to form, quiet, poisonous plans, to make sure that Abony's hair, her beauty, and even her name would never threaten Omalara's place again. What Abony didn't know was that her life, so far untouched by palace intrigue, was about to change forever. And it would begin with the thing she had always taken for granted, her radiant hair. The whispers began like a light wind, barely noticed at first, curling through the marketplace and drifting between the mud-walled huts of the village. At the center of it all was Abony, the orphan girl with hair so dark it gleamed like wet onyx under the sun, and so thick it seemed to hold its own light. The elders often smiled when she passed, and some would nod thoughtfully, murmuring to each other about the sacred crown. Perhaps, one old woman had been overheard saying, "The crown will choose her this year." Beauty such as that is rare, and beauty is the spirit of the harvest. Such talk was not lost on the ears of Adunbai, the chief's only daughter. Adunbai had grown up in the palace compound, surrounded by silks from the traders and the finest oils from distant coasts. Her hair, though carefully tended by the best hands in the kingdom, was nowhere near as radiant as Abony's. And in a culture where hair was not merely beauty but a mark of divine favor, this difference was a wound that festered in her pride. One evening, as the sun dropped low and the shadows stretched like long fingers, Adunbai sat with her closest friends, daughters of wealthy traders and respected warriors, beneath the wide arms of the baobab tree. The air was thick with the smell of roasting maize, and the sounds of the drumming in the distance seemed far away from their hushed conversation. "Have you seen the way she walks?" Adunbai said, her voice a whisper laced with venom. "Head high, as if she already carries the crown." Her friends leaned in, eager for the taste of scandal. "I heard," said one girl, "that she spends hours before a mirror, combing her hair like she is a queen already." "She is an orphan," another chimed in. "What right does she have to think herself worthy of the crown? She has no family name, no noble blood." Adunbai smiled faintly, satisfied as their words began weaving the tapestry of a rumor. They spoke of Abony's supposed vanity, of how she refused to share her comb with other girls, of how she supposedly turned away suitors with a proud laugh. None of it was true, but the truth mattered little. Rumor was a seed that needed only fertile ground, and jealousy was rich soil indeed. Over the following days the whispers grew stronger. Women in the marketplace would glance at Abony with curiosity tinged by suspicion. Some even lowered their voices when she passed, speaking of her as if she were dangerous, as if her beauty were a weapon meant to cut down the pride of others. Young men who had once admired her now hesitated to approach, wary of being seen as enchanted by her self-importance. Abony herself noticed the change. She could feel it in the way greetings were shorter, in the way laughter sometimes died when she entered a room. But she said nothing. She kept tending to the small garden by her hut, weaving baskets for trade and carrying water from the stream, her long braids swaying down her back like flowing rivers. The elders, however, did not silence their admiration. Abony's beauty, they said, was like the rain after a long drought. It was a blessing, and blessings could not be ignored. The crown, after all, was not given, it chose. And the harvest ceremony was only a few weeks away. This talk drove a Dunby nearly mad with rage. She would sit in her chamber, running her fingers through her own hair, pulling at it in frustration. In the dim lamplight, she stared at her reflection and saw not the future queen of the harvest ceremony, but a girl eclipsed by an orphan. The gossip campaign intensified. A Dunby's friends began planting stories among the young apprentices and the old market women, claiming that Abony had once mocked the chief's own family, that she believed herself more beautiful than all the palace daughters combined, that she prayed to the spirits only to ask for more beauty. Lies became as plentiful as the millet in the storehouse. And the strangest part? The stories began to take root in the minds of those who heard them. In a village where envy was often hidden behind smiles, people found themselves repeating these tales as if they were truth. Still, Abony walked through the days with quiet dignity. Her hair glistened in the sun, unbothered by the dust of the road or the whispers in the air. If the crown was to choose her, she would not seek it through flattery or deceit. But in the shadows of the baobab tree, jealousy was plotting, softly, patiently, dangerously. The moon hung low over the village, casting pale silver light over the huts and dusty pathways. Most of the villagers had gone to sleep, their fires reduced to glowing embers, but in a dark corner near the chief's compound, a group of figures whispered and laughed quietly. The chief's daughter stood at the center, her face twisted with satisfaction. Tonight, she would put an end to the whispers, the admiration, and the threat Abony's beauty posed. They waited until Abony, exhausted from a long day of chores, was walking home alone. Her arms were tired, her bare feet dusty, and she clutched a small gourd of water. She didn't notice the shadows slipping behind her until a strong hand covered her mouth. Before she could cry out, another hand gripped her arms tightly. The water gourd fell to the ground, spilling into the dirt. "Hold her still," the chief's daughter ordered in a cold, deliberate voice. The other girls obeyed, each holding Abony's limbs with surprising strength. Abony struggled, muffled whimpers escaping her lips, but she was no match for their numbers. They dragged her toward the village square, their laughter rising as if this were a game. The square was eerily silent except for the sound of their bare feet shuffling across the ground. The fire pit at its center still smoldered faintly, casting a dull orange glow that danced over their faces. When they reached the middle, the chief's daughter stepped forward, holding something in her hand, a sharp, glinting blade that caught the moonlight. Abony's eyes widened in terror. "Please, don't," she whispered, her voice trembling. But her plea only fueled their cruelty. "You think you're better than us?" the chief's daughter sneered. "You think your hair will win you a crown? Let's see how a bald girl impresses anyone." The first lock fell with a sickening snip. It landed softly on the ground, a curl of deep black glistening like silk. Then another and another, each cut accompanied by bursts of laughter from the girls surrounding her. The chief's daughter worked slowly, deliberately, dragging the blade close to Abony's scalp until no strand longer than a finger remained. The cold night air bit at Abony's bare head. Her tears ran hot down her cheeks, mixing with the sweat on her skin. Around her, mocking voices rose louder. "Look at her now," one girl shouted. "Not so special anymore," another jeered. Abony's heart pounded as the humiliation sank deep into her bones. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but her voice caught in her throat. Every giggle, every cruel word carved into her like a knife sharper than the one that had stolen her hair. When they were done, the chief's daughter stepped back, tossing the blade aside with a satisfied smirk. "Run home, crown princess," she mocked. Abony didn't wait. She tore herself from their grasp and ran barefoot through the square, her sobs echoing in the still night. She clutched her arms around her bare head as if she could hide it, but there was no hiding from the sound of their laughter. It followed her into the shadows, burning into her memory. That night, the village slept under a quiet sky, but for Abony the darkness felt endless. She would remember every face in that circle, every hand that held her down, every word that had cut as deeply as the blade. And though she didn't know it yet, the seeds of something far greater than humiliation had been planted within her. Something that would not stay buried. Abony ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave way beneath her. She collapsed behind a cluster of tall banana plants near the edge of the village, curling into herself as if she could make the world disappear. Her scalp stung from the cruel cutting, each breath hitching in her chest as sobs shook her. She didn't know how long she sat there in the darkness, long enough for the moon to climb higher, long enough for her tears to soak the earth beneath her. The rustle of footsteps made her flinch. She pressed herself against the plants, heart pounding. But the figure that emerged from the shadows was not one of the cruel girls. It was Mama F, the old weaver, her back bent with age, her eyes pale but sharp as a hawk's. She carried a basket on her hip filled with scraps of thread and cloth, smelling faintly of dye and smoke. "Child," Mama F said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years and storms weathered. "Come out from there." Abony hesitated, wiping her face with the back of her hand, but something in the old woman's tone, gentle yet unyielding, made her obey. She crawled forward into the moonlight, her shorn head glistening with sweat and tears. Mama F's eyes lingered on her for a long moment. She did not gasp or recoil at the sight of Abony's bare head. Instead, she reached out a hand and rested it lightly on her shoulder. "Ah," she murmured, "they think they have shamed you. But hair is only grass that grows on the head. What matters is the ground it grows from." Abony tried to speak but her voice cracked. They laughed at me. They said no one will look at me now." Mama F's thin lips curved in a knowing smile. "Let them laugh. The mouth can make many noises, it does not make truth." She shifted the basket from her hip to the ground and sat beside Abony. For a moment they were silent, listening to the night, the chirp of crickets, the far-off hoot of an owl, the sigh of the wind through the banana leaves. Then Mama F began to speak, her voice low, as though sharing something not meant for every ear. "Do you know the story of the sacred crown, child?" Abony shook her head. "They tell it wrong these days," the old woman said, "as if the crown belongs only to the noble-born or the beautiful. But I was there the year the last crown chose its wearer, oh, many seasons ago. I watched it happen with these eyes before they dimmed." Her voice took on a rhythm like the weaving of a loom. "The crown is not just gold and jewels. It carries the spirit of the kingdom's first queen, a woman who led her people with wisdom and courage. It knows the heart of whoever touches it. You may dress in silk, braid your hair like the river's flow, paint your lips with the brightest dyes, but if your heart is not steady and pure, the crown will not stay on your head. It will slide away as if rejecting you." Abony listened, her tears slowing. Mama F leaned closer, her pale eyes gleaming. "The crown has no love for vanity. It seeks one thing, truth. And truth cannot be cut away with a blade. Not even 1,000 blades." Abony swallowed, glancing down at her hands. "But I don't look like I belong anywhere now. They'll all see." Mama F chuckled, the sound dry but warm. "The world will always see what it wants to see. But the spirit in the crown sees what is hidden. And if it sees you as worthy, child, no one, not even the chief's own daughter, can take it from you." The words settled into Abony's chest like embers, glowing faintly where there had only been cold shame before. Mama F reached into her basket and pulled out a strip of soft indigo cloth, frayed at the edges. She tied it gently around Abony's head, covering her scalp. "Wear this for now," she said. "Not to hide, but to remind yourself that beauty changes shape, but worth does not fade." Abony's fingers brushed the cloth, feeling its warmth despite the night air. She could not bring herself to smile, not yet, but she felt something stir within her, a fragile thread of hope. Mama F rose slowly, taking her basket in hand. "Go home, child. Rest. The harvest ceremony is coming, and the crown has been waiting a long time. You may find it has been waiting for you." As the old weaver disappeared into the shadows, Abony sat for a moment longer, her bare feet pressing into the cool earth. The laughter from earlier still echoed faintly in her mind, but now it met the memory of Mama F's words, and the two sounds clashed until the cruelty seemed smaller, weaker. She rose, adjusted the indigo cloth and began to walk home, unaware that each step carried her closer to a fate her enemies would never have imagined. The sun rose that morning like molten gold poured slowly across the horizon, spilling light over the rooftops of the village. Drums were already sounding in the distance, deep and steady, their rhythm matching the heartbeat of the kingdom. It was the day of the harvest ceremony, a day when laughter and song usually drowned out all worries. But this year there was more than harvest on the villagers' minds. The crown would choose its wearer, and whispers about who it might be had swirled for weeks like wind before a storm. By mid-morning, the village square was alive with movement. Women in brightly patterned wrappers balanced baskets of fruits and gourds on their heads, while children darted between their legs, chasing one another and shouting with excitement. The elders sat in a semicircle, their faces solemn beneath wide-brimmed hats. The scent of roasted yam and spicy groundnut stew floated through the air. At the far end of the square, beneath the great irako tree, a raised platform had been built for the ceremony. Upon it stood a carved wooden stand draped with white cloth, and resting on the cloth was the sacred crown. Even in the open daylight, it glimmered as though it held a light of its own. Its band was pure gold, etched with symbols of rain, fertility, and justice. At the top were ancestral feathers, brilliant white and impossibly fine, that once belonged to the kingdom's first queen's ceremonial bird. 4 crown keepers, their bodies painted in sacred ash, guarded it closely. They had not spoken a single word since dawn, for the crown's spirit demanded reverence and silence. At the center of the gathering sat Adesawa, the chief's daughter, draped in layers of coral beads and silk dyed a fierce crimson. Her hair was piled high and woven with strands of gold, so heavy it seemed her head might tilt forward. She sat tall and unmoving, her lips curved in the faintest smile, eyes scanning the crowd with a gaze that dared anyone to doubt her. She had been preparing for this day for months, ever since the rumors began that the crown might look beyond the royal bloodline. She had rehearsed her walk, her bow, her smile. She had commissioned her friends to whisper in the ears of the village women, painting herself as the only suitable choice. And now, with Abony humiliated and her radiant hair gone, she believed victory was certain. "Daughter of the chief," one of her companions whispered, leaning in close, "today the crown will know its rightful queen." Adesawa tilted her chin higher, her eyes flicking briefly toward the crowd where Abony stood at the edge, half hidden behind a group of traders. The indigo cloth Mama F had tied around her head still rested there, and she wore a simple wrapper of faded blue. To most she looked like any other girl, ordinary, unremarkable. That suited Abony fine. She had no wish to draw attention, not while the sting of her shame still lingered. But even from across the square, Abony could feel the crown's presence. It was not like seeing a beautiful object and wanting it. It was like sensing something alive, something that could see through her and weigh her heart on a scale. She tried to look away, but her eyes kept drifting back to it, drawn by a pull she couldn't explain. The village crier stepped onto the platform, his deep voice booming over the murmurs of the crowd. "On this day, as the ancestors watch, the sacred crown will find the head that carries truth and worth. Let the candidates come forward." A hush fell as the first young women approached the platform, daughters of prominent warriors, traders, and council members. Each one moved with practiced grace, their clothes gleaming, their hairstyles elaborate. They bowed, touched the cloth upon which the crown rested, and waited as the keepers gently lifted it toward their heads. For some, the crown would rest for only a heartbeat before sliding off to the side. For others, it would barely touch their hair before slipping away as though repelled. The crowd murmured with each attempt, watching for the moment when the crown might stay. When Adesawa's turn came, a ripple of anticipation ran through the square. She stepped forward with her chin high, her steps measured and regal. The keepers lifted the crown with both hands, their faces expressionless. Slowly, reverently, they lowered it toward her gleaming head. The feathers caught the sunlight, glowing as if lit from within. The gold band descended until it touched her crown of braids. And then, without warning, the crown tilted to one side and slid free, landing in the keeper's hands with a soft chime of metal. Gasps swept through the crowd. Adesawa's smile faltered for only an instant, but in that instant, something ugly flashed in her eyes. She stepped back, her body stiff, pretending the failure meant nothing. The crier's voice rang out again, calling for the next candidate. But Abony's heart was pounding now, so loud she could hear it in her ears. The old weaver's words echoed in her mind. "If it sees you as worthy, child, no one, not even the chief's own daughter, can take it from you." The crown sat gleaming on its stand once more, patient, waiting. And though Abony had not stepped forward, she felt, deep in her bones, that its unseen eyes were already on her. The moment the sacred crown slid from Adesawa's head, it was as if the entire square forgot how to breathe. People shifted in place, glancing from one face to another, their whispers barely audible over the crackle of the wind in the irako tree. The crown keepers caught the fallen treasure before it could touch the ground, cradling it as though it were a living thing that had just recoiled from harm. Adesawa stepped back with the stiffness of someone pretending they hadn't stumbled. Her lips curled in a half-smile meant to suggest she was above disappointment, but her eyes betrayed her, hard and dark as stones pulled from deep water. The village crier cleared his throat and announced, "The crown will continue its choosing." His voice was steady, but even he could not hide the surprise in it. The next girl approached, daughter of a respected trader whose caravans reached far beyond the kingdom's borders. Her garments shimmered with imported cloth, and beads of polished amber framed her delicate face. She bowed deeply, and the keepers lowered the crown toward her head. For a moment, it seemed the crown might rest there. It hovered, trembling in the air above her braids, but then it dropped like a dead leaf and rolled gently into a keeper's hands. The crowd murmured louder now. The elders exchanged looks, their brows furrowed beneath their hats. The chief's wife narrowed her eyes, and the chief himself sat with arms folded, his jaw set tight. One by one the candidates stepped forward. The warrior's niece, with her broad shoulders and proud stance. The potter's daughter, graceful as the vessel she shaped from clay. Even the youngest of the noble-born, barely into womanhood, her hair braided with seashells from the coast. Each time, the crown behaved the same. It touched the girl's head for only an instant, then slid away, growing heavier, almost resentful, until it would not remain at all. A breeze picked up in the square, not strong but strange. It did not come from the east where the harmattan winds blew, nor from the west where the rains were born. It seemed to circle the platform itself, a restless stirring that lifted the feathers on the crown and made them quiver like the wings of a living bird. By the time the last candidate stepped down, the mood in the square had changed entirely. Where there had been confidence and celebration, there was now uncertainty, a prickle of unease. No one could remember a ceremony in which the crown had refused every girl of standing. The chief rose slowly from his carved stool, his shadow stretching long in the afternoon sun. "Has the crown been angered?" he asked, his voice carrying across the square. One of the keepers, a tall man with skin the color of deep earth, bowed low before speaking. "The crown has its will, my chief. It sees what no eye can see, and it answers to no voice but the ancestors." Adesawa's face tightened, though she masked it with another smile. "Perhaps," she said loudly so all could hear, "the crown needs reminding of who is worthy. It has been stored for many seasons. Such things grow, forgetful." But her words only deepened the murmur among the villagers. Some nodded in agreement, unwilling to believe the crown could reject the chief's daughter. Others exchanged skeptical glances, for everyone knew the crown's choosing had never failed. The wind grew stranger still, curling around ankles and wrists, tugging at garments. Abony, still lingering at the edge of the crowd, felt it like fingers brushing her skin. It slipped beneath the indigo cloth on her head, cool against her scalp, almost searching. One of the elders leaned toward another. "Do you feel it?" he whispered. "I do," the second replied. "It stirs for someone. But not for the ones who came forward." The crier turned back to the crowd, raising his arms. "The crown will choose again if there is one yet untested. Step forward now, for the ancestors grow restless." The breeze swirled once more, carrying with it the faintest scent of shea oil and hibiscus, a scent that Abony's heart recognized instantly. It was the fragrance her mother used to wear before sickness took her. The villagers shifted to let the wind pass, but it did not drift away. It circled back, a quiet insistence in its motion, as though pointing toward the far edge of the gathering, where a girl in a faded wrapper stood half hidden. Every pair of eyes began to turn. It began with a single feather. One of the long ancestral plumes woven into the crown trembled as if caught in an invisible breath. The keepers had not touched it. No hand, human or otherwise, had come near. A hush fell over the square, thick as smoke. Even the chief's impatient tapping of his staff stilled. The trembling spread to the other feathers until the whole crown seemed alive, its gold filigree shimmering as though polished by sunlight that no one else could see. The breeze that had been prowling the edges of the gathering suddenly gathered strength, curling inward, spiraling around the keepers. Robes flapped. The scent of hibiscus and shea swelled again, fuller now, unmistakable. Gasps rose as the crown lifted from the keeper's hands, slowly at first as though testing its own weight, then higher, floating above their heads like a bird deciding where to land. The chief's daughter stiffened, her painted lips parting. "It remembers," she whispered, certain it would return to her. But the crown did not even pause in her direction. It turned in the air, slow, deliberate, until the point of its spiral faced the far edge of the square. There, half hidden behind the backs of taller villagers, stood Abony. Her wrapper was plain, worn at the seams. Her head was bare, her hair cropped unevenly from the cruelty she had endured. Her chin tilted downward, though her eyes, wide and unblinking, followed the crown's every motion. She did not step forward, she did not dare. Yet the air between her and the floating crown seemed to hum, a low thrumming that prickled the skin. The wind curled about her ankles like a cat greeting its chosen human. The villagers, sensing something unearthly, drew back, clearing a narrow path. The crown floated along that invisible corridor, each movement weightless yet powerful, as if carried on the breath of the ancestors themselves. When it reached her, it hovered for a heartbeat just above her forehead. Abony's lips parted. She could smell the faint earthiness of the feathers, feel the cool shadow of the gold above her skin. Then, with a grace that seemed almost tender, the crown lowered itself onto her head. There was no clatter, no awkward sliding away as it had with the others. Instead, the weight felt right, neither heavy nor light but whole. Her scalp tingled, and the places where her hair had been cruelly shorn began to glow, not with fire but with a soft, living light, warm as the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon. Gasps erupted all around. "She has no hair," someone exclaimed, half in shock, half in awe. Yet the glow only deepened, weaving around the short strands like the light had been waiting there all along. The gold caught it, reflecting it in ripples across the faces of the crowd. The feathers seemed brighter, fuller, as though the crown had been asleep until this very moment. One of the elders fell to his knees, pressing his forehead to the ground. "It is decided," he murmured. "The crown has chosen." The chief's daughter's cheeks burned red beneath her paint, but no words came from her lips. Her friends shifted uncomfortably, their bracelets clinking like chains. The old weaver, standing near the front, allowed a small knowing smile to crease her face. Her eyes met Abony's, and in them was the quiet pride of someone who had always known this day would come. The wind swirled once more, lifting the edges of Abony's wrapper and making the glow in her hair shimmer like sunlight on water. It was not just the crown that had chosen, it was the kingdom's ancestors, the spirits of those who saw beyond braids and jewels, who sought the worth hidden in the marrow of a person's soul. Somewhere above, unseen by all but Abony, the light shifted, and for the briefest moment, she thought she saw the silhouette of her mother smiling in the air before dissolving into the breeze. The murmurs that had swirled in the crowd like restless birds began to still as the elders stepped forward. Their robes swayed softly in the lingering breeze, the same wind that had carried the crown to Abony. Faces lined with age and memory looked upon her, not with surprise any longer, but with a kind of reverence. One of the eldest women, her hair white as dried cotton, raised her staff and tapped it thrice against the ground. "Hear this, people of our kingdom," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the square. "Today the spirit of the crown has spoken louder than our tongues, stronger than our pride." A hush fell deeper still. Even the children stopped fidgeting. "This crown," she continued, pointing to the gold and feathers resting serenely on Abony's head, "has been worn by queens whose beauty was sung in songs, whose braids shimmered like river reeds in the sun. Yet the spirit within it sees with eyes older than ours. It does not count the number of strands upon a head, nor the gleam of jewels upon a brow. It sees what cannot be braided, cannot be burned away." She turned to Abony fully now. "It saw your courage when you stood alone, unshielded from cruelty. It saw your humility when you did not shout your worth to those who could not hear it. And it saw your heart, pure as water drawn from the deepest well, untouched by malice though you were wronged." The words seemed to ripple through the crowd. Some faces softened with guilt, others lit with dawning understanding. A few, those who had joined in mocking Abony, could not meet her eyes. Another elder, a man whose back was bent from years of harvest, stepped forward. His hands, knotted with age, clasped together as he spoke. "Beauty without kindness is an empty gourd. It may shine on the outside, but inside there is nothing to nourish. Kindness without beauty, however, is still a full harvest, feeding all who come near. And when beauty and kindness dwell together in one spirit, then the land itself rejoices." He lifted his gaze to the chief's daughter, who stood pale and rigid. "The crown did not reject you because your braids were fine or your skin was smooth. It rejected you because your heart was closed, your words sharpened like thorns. No amount of ornament can hide such things from the ancestors." A faint, embarrassed murmur rose among the girl's friends. They too had felt the sting of the rejection when the crown had refused them. The white-haired elder raised her staff again, drawing the eyes back to her. "Let this day be remembered. The harvest ceremony is not merely to honor the fertility of our fields, but the fertility of our hearts. We cannot plant seeds of cruelty and expect a harvest of honor. The old weaver, who had been standing quietly near the edge of the circle, stepped forward and bowed deeply to Abony. You have shown that dignity can be carried even when all else is stripped away. May this crown rest lightly upon you, for you do not need its weight to be who you are. Abony felt her throat tighten. She had no words, only a warmth that spread through her chest like the morning sun. She looked over the faces before her, the ashamed, the proud, the awed, and her eyes lingered on those who had once mocked her. She did not glare, nor did she gloat. Instead, she offered the faintest of smiles, one that held neither triumph nor bitterness, only peace. The chief finally rose from his seat, his face unreadable. He walked toward Abony, the crowd parting for him like grass before the wind. When he reached her, he placed a hand on her shoulder. The kingdom will remember this day, and I will remember the lesson my daughter has yet to learn. His voice was low, but it carried. Then he stepped back, and the drummers began to play, not the triumphant march reserved for beauty queens of the past, but a steady, reverent rhythm that felt older than the earth beneath their feet. It was a song of truth, of worth found in places no mirror could reveal. And so, under the watchful eyes of her people and the unseen gaze of her ancestors, Abony stood crowned, not for the length of her hair, but for the strength of her heart. The sun dipped low, bathing the village in gold as the final echoes of the drums faded into the warm air. Abony stood at the center of the square, the crown still light upon her head. Her gaze swept over the faces before her, those who had whispered, those who had laughed, those who had cut her hair beneath the cruel glow of the moon. The sting of those nights still lingered somewhere deep inside her, but it no longer ruled her heart. She stepped forward, the hush around her deepening. "You took my hair," she said softly, "and with it you tried to take my pride. But pride is not what makes us whole. I forgive you." A ripple moved through the crowd, relief in some faces, shame in others. The chief's daughter lowered her eyes, unable to meet Abony's, her hands twisting in the folds of her fine garment. Even her friends, who had once strutted beside her, stood smaller now, their shoulders bent as though the weight of the moment pressed them down. The elders, moved by the strength in Abony's voice, conferred in low tones. The white-haired matriarch lifted her staff. "From this day onward," she declared, "the sacred crown shall no longer be the prize for beauty of face or fineness of hair. It shall rest only upon the head of the one whose heart honors the ancestors, whose spirit feeds the people, whose deeds plant the seeds of goodness in the land." A murmur of approval swelled, growing into a cheer. The drummers struck up a slow, steady rhythm that rolled like distant thunder. Children danced at the edges of the square, mimicking the steps of their elders. Even the chief bowed his head in agreement, placing his hand over his chest. Abony turned, her eyes catching the old weaver's. The woman smiled knowingly, her wrinkled face crinkling like woven cloth. "A queen is not made by what she wears," the weaver said, her voice warm. "But today, child, you have shown us that sometimes a crown finds the one already wearing it inside." The villagers moved as one to kneel, even those who had wronged her. Abony's heart swelled, not with triumph but with a deep, quiet joy. She understood then that her life would no longer be her own, it would belong to her people, to the land, and to the lessons the crown had chosen to teach. And so, under a sky streaked with the first stars of night, Abony became their queen, not for the braid she once wore, but for the forgiveness she offered and the change she inspired. From that day on, the crown shone brightest not on the head of the fairest, but on the one whose spirit was worthy of its light.